I guess what we're saying here is it subsidized? Is there a real business? If we didn't have the funds, would it all drop down basically?
Right. Well, I think at this point, yeah, we need to continue to invest in this. And I think from a government perspective, California has committed about $10 billion to help this industry grow. And I think that that's absolutely essential. That really dwarfs what's happening at the federal level through NEVI funding. But so I think states are responsible for continuing to invest in this. If you look at some of I've looked at some of the RFP responses for some of the NEVI funds, and you can see the earlier entrants into the space, such as Tesla. The cost for them to build and install a station is tiny compared to the rest of the industry. And they've been doing it for 12 or 15 years. They're basically producing widgets. And I think just the rest of the industry through these subsidies will be able to catch up to that, but it's going to be a couple of years for that to happen.
So you just mentioned Tesla, okay, and I want to put this to all three of you. And Jordan, I know when you said the numbers of chargers really help, if you got 100 chargers and 5 of them are down, it's not so bad. Why is Tesla more reliable? What are they doing different? What's going on with Tesla? Jordan,
I think it's because it's a closed system at the end of the day, right? I mean, they can control everything from, as Carleen mentioned, the plug and charge component. They control the payment piece. They control helping the user to find the charging, to know which ones are available, which, by the way, when you go to a Tesla charging location, often one or more of those chargers is not working, but at the end, they are directing you to the places where there are chargers, and they know which ones are working and what's the most availability versus another location. Not to mention that there's a lot more of those locations. So I'm sure I'm missing a few things, but there's just a whole host of things that ultimately, by having built over the last decade or so a proprietary closed solution, focused on their vehicles, they've been able to control the experience better.
And Rue, if I can, Jordan, I completely agree. And I think part of that comes from, and others in the industry do this as well, not only the experience, but I've spoken to Tesla a number of times. I think the way that they think about charging is customer first. And I'm not saying that others don't, but I think this is where public-private, bringing it back to the other question, public-private partnerships are probably quite important. I'm very biased. That's spent a lot of years in public-private partnerships. I've worked on a lot of the NEVI deals, but I think by structuring between the public and the private and putting a consumer first, but also protecting the public sector as well as the private sector, right? There has to be returns to be made to spur that investment and continue that relationship. But ultimately, the customer at the end of the day is who you're serving. And I think that sometimes gets forgotten. I think, Jordan, you mentioned the different suppliers and let's buy the charger. They don't care so much about the end user. They just want to sell chargers. And that's not to disrespect anyone selling chargers, but ultimately they're not responsible for that. It could be white labeled. It could be JLL branded. It could be Phillips branded. It could be anyone, but it could be the same producer sitting behind it or OEM sitting behind it. You at the end of the day as a site host and whoever that has branded that is responsible for that customer journey. And I think Tesla does a fantastic job of putting the customer first.
I couldn't agree more. Carleen, what's your take on that with the Tesla infrastructure?
Yeah, well, several things that Jordan and Robert mentioned about the experience, this closed system, but I did want to point out, so we've been following some of the Magic Dock experiences at Tesla stations, which they've opened up, I think, about 7 in the US. And you really don't see through PlugShare, you don't see the same issues as with the other vendors. I think that the thing that you really see are short cables, and then also that the stations maybe not delivering the total kilowatts that the vehicle is asking for. So I think that derating is going to be an issue. But I also want to mention what Jordan was talking about, more information. The California Energy Commission just released their proposed regulations for reliability, and they really are requesting or may be demanding very detailed information that could help with the consumer experience ultimately, and be able to, as Jordan said, direct you to the place where there are stations available and where they are up and running, because that will help consumers in their satisfaction and their confidence dramatically.
So those requirements, Carleen, are they similar to weights and measures, what we see on gas pumps?
Yeah, they're so weights and measures are, I think it's county by county, are evaluating the amount of energy that's flowing from the charging station. But that's done, I think, once every 2 years. So it's really not the same as what we're looking for in terms of this is much, much more detailed data, more than I've seen anywhere else requested. So I think that's going to have an impact on other states and ultimately on national information data sharing.
So what kind of penalties are enforced for these requirements if they fail to meet them?
Shall I take that? Sorry.
Yeah, please, yes.
Well, here's the rub. Here's the rub is there's when the federal government passed passed 97% for NEVI funds and the community funds, and the same with the California Energy Commission. They have in their contracts 97%, but there are no penalties. There's one I'm aware of, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, with one of their programs. They withhold the final payment, the final 25% of the payment, until the company can demonstrate that they met a certain usage threshold. But we're deeply involved in this, and trying to make sure that there's actual enforcement and penalties. And I do think having a force out there that's actually testing the stations and being able to provide really reliable field testing will start to give agencies the confidence to have enforcement and penalties. And ultimately, consumers are going to be the ultimate decision makers about the penalties. So no matter what government does and how far government should go, we really want private industry and the consumers to make those decisions.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, we need skilled, trained technicians out there to be carrying out these tests and service and repair. I'm a big advocate for operations and maintenance and a skilled workforce to do that. I've got a question come through. Well, once the chargers have reached the end of its life, is there the opportunity to retrofit the old equipment with newer technology, or are there recycling programs in place? Rob, what do you know about that? End of life chargers. And before you answer this, I saw a contractor that was ripping out chargers. This was in the UK. He was ripping out chargers to put in the latest 150 kilowatt chargers. Waste of money. We got to get it right first time, never mind the recycling. What's your thoughts on that?
So I do believe that there are recycling programs in place, though I'm not very familiar with them, so I won't comment too much more. But it's funny you say that, where we had a client come to us and they had an old charger. By the way, old in this context is, I think it was about 7 years, which is fairly old in what is a relatively nascent market. And I think maybe the overarching statement I'll make is, I don't think we've gotten there yet. I have seen anecdotal evidence, though, and it depends, I think, on the chargers. Level 2s, this kind of the slower 4 to 6 hour chargers. When it comes to replacement, I have, in 9 out of 10 instances, in 9 out of 10 times, the manufacturer will say rip and replace for a level 2. It's almost certainly cheaper to do that. I think we talked about that. I was giving an anecdote about my fridge. Exact same thing. Buy a new one. It's cheaper. The parts may well exist, but it's just a better way to do it. I think level 3 is more complicated, and Jordan may have some views on that, just because of the fact that the equipment is so much more expensive. There's a lot more that goes into it. We've talked about utilities, and so it makes it more challenging. I have not seen, and maybe Carleen, you've seen this in some of your research, so much of a replacement on the level 3. I think typically that's what occurs unless there's a major failure. By the way, I have seen a statistic that over 90% of problems with chargers tends to be where there's faults, software. And that's what a lot of manufacturers will tell you. And so from a hardware perspective, I don't know if it's tried and tested enough to understand the economics associated with replacing equipment, but much more likely on level 3 than level 2 for sure.
Yeah, so you mentioned most of the problems with EV chargers derive from network and software. Okay, so and that's a problem in itself because there's not, most of the electricians don't know anything about software. Sorry, guys, but you bend pipe and pull wire and you install heavy equipment. So there's a need there for a skilled, trained workforce to do that.
But Rue, I will say that the charger is only as good as the physical asset itself, and so if that's broken and you don't have an O&M plan in place, a lot of those can be the software can be troubleshooted in a back office. But to go and fix a component on a charger, you got to be there on site, maybe driving from LA up to the north of California, but you got to be there to fix the thing in the first place, which is why I think it's so important to have that asset plan in place to maintain that asset over what we think whatever the life of that asset may be. The software is definitely a separate issue, but I think they need to come closer together and be better managed.
Yeah,
exactly.
I have a different view, sorry, Robert, than
Sure.
Robert does about, there's absolutely interconnectivity issues, there's software issues, firmware issues. There are a lot of significant issues. But, our study, as well as the JD Power, demonstrate that this, 25% are due to broken hardware. And I think that, that's not going to change. If we look at, things like vandalism or the value of the copper in the cables, some of this I think is also design, looking at, are these cables just hanging out there for people to come and take, what type of glass protector is on the station itself. So I think it's fair to say that the early technology, it's all basically a startup, nationwide or worldwide, and that, we're learning a lot from the early installations. And I see, rip and replace both at level 2 and level 3. I think it's just less expensive, and, you come into so many different issues when you're trying to navigate, kludge together all these different, well, I've got this, controller at this version. And so I don't know about the recycling though. I know that's an issue in solar as well. What do we do with these parts when we tear them out? I'm not sure about any of that.
So, for our attendees and listeners, the difference between level 2s and DC fast chargers, the billions of dollars that are out there, should we be putting more level 2s in, which I think you can get like 8 level 2s, maybe even more for the price of a DC fast charger? What do you think, George?
Sure. Yeah, so I don't know if it was just me, but Rue is frozen here.
Yes.
But I think I got his question. I wanted to make sure it wasn't me that was frozen. So yeah, I think it's a good question. I'm a big believer in what I call the portfolio approach to deployment and availability of charging. I don't believe there's a one size fits all answer to charging of vehicles, and that all the various levels of charging are relevant to people depending upon what their needs are. And at the end of the day, it comes down to 2 factors. To oversimplify it, it's cost and it's convenience. And generally speaking, the cost to fuel and charge with electricity goes down with the lower power and delivery, because the capital cost of the charger is cheaper and the cost to deliver that electricity is cheaper if you slow down, if you have slower speeds. And obviously, correspondingly, it's more expensive as you raise the speed up. And so, some combination of that and the convenience factor will help determine at any given moment whether a driver charges at a level 1, a level 2, or